I'll begin with something that is perhaps familiar to most of the audience here, which is the story of the two earthquakes that Croatia suffered, and especially in Zagreb, there was extensive damage to heritage. There was an ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, and then in between, there was a flash flood event in July 2020, where once again, heritage sites and buildings and museums that were damaged had to suffer from the ravages of the flash flood. A similar event, not a similar, but a larger scale event was in 2020, the blast in Beirut port, which came amidst an economic crisis and the coronavirus pandemic. Onset of winter rainfall caused further damage, and it slowed evacuation and increased the risk of acid rain. Now, what was common between these two? And also, it led to the extensive damage of heritage buildings as well as collections. There were museums that were damaged, art galleries, local life was disrupted. Common amongst these two events is this, that there was a natural hazard or a man-made hazard, which was the hazard event, which was the triggering part. And then it set a chain of, chain reaction and led to some further events. Some of them were, the hazards became together, they were overlapping hazards. Some of them were secondary hazard events. Main aspect of it was that they met with some systemic vulnerabilities like lack of capacity, poor investment in physical infrastructure, and many other. And in both cases, they were context-specific systemic vulnerabilities. What are we looking at here? We are looking at cascading events. As Chiara said in her introduction, the uncertainty is increasing, and we do not know how effective our risk management has been, because despite whatever we are doing, it seems it's not working. But I would like to point out to one major problem in our risk management, and that is that we are extremely hazard-centric in our press, in our media coverage, in the way we describe things. We say the earthquake came and everything fell apart. The flash flood happened and books were wet. But we're not looking at the two other aspects of the equation, which is exposure and systemic vulnerabilities. And it's these systemic vulnerabilities that we have to progressively work on and come from the larger context in which heritage is, the social, economic, cultural vulnerabilities that we have to really, really look at and understand how they are making us more vulnerable to the disaster risk. So in short, I don't want to get into this diagram, but it is about building capacity for multi-hazard risk management, looking at both physical vulnerability, social, economic vulnerabilities, looking at our exposure to these, and then coming out with multi-risk zoning. But how do we do that? How do we build capacity like this? And is it just, does it look very good on paper, or can we translate it to reality? The first thing that we might have to do, and we have to do, I think it's like already it's being talked about, whether you call it futures thinking or anything, it's about breaking the silos, breaking interdisciplinary as well as intradisciplinary barriers, and sharing knowledge. The second aspect is interagency coordination and cooperation. Disasters, or what we are talking about here, are system-wide risks, which heritage sector cannot deal with alone. Therefore, it does require a multi-agency response. And for that, we will have to get out of our silo and make overtures to other agencies that are dealing with disaster risk management. Last but not the least, we have to connect with local communities, and we have to accept that just as heritage builds capacities, it also generates vulnerabilities. and what are those vulnerabilities, and how can we connect with our local populations, local communities better, and contribute to their sustainable development and reduce the disaster risk, both for heritage as well as its associated communities. Which capacities then we have to build and how? I will try to share some experiences, some examples from our recent work and our experiences around the world. I'm not saying that this is the way, but it seems that we will have to explore in this direction more, and we'll have to, direct our efforts towards working together, co-creating solutions for these very complex problems. First and foremost, we need capacities for multi-hazard risk assessments. The diagram that I showed earlier, which is a complex one, and the time here does not permit me to get into details into it. Basically, what we need is to understand what are those scenarios where multiple risks will come together, where our systemic vulnerabilities will be maximum at play and will lead to secondary or overlapping hazard, annihilating local capacities. And that leads us to scenario-based planning and also building capacity then for mitigating multiple risks. And that can only happen if we reduce some vulnerabilities, build some capacities for preparedness and response at a scale. And this means we need meaningful partnerships with humanitarian aid and development, disaster risk management and civil protection, local governments, and local communities. And when I say we, I mean the heritage sector in general. What would that help us to achieve? Just like in Beirut case, the risk was obvious. There was, tons of material lying in the port, and this was the most busy area. But somewhere, the risk perception between agencies was very different, and its mitigation was not actively sought for. And the sectors that were affected were unaware of this risk. So this coordinated risk assessment would allow us to understand even the unknown risk, because right now, let's say in Croatia, everybody is focused on the earthquake risk, but what about fire? So these kind of things, if you undertake coordinated risk assessments, they help you to understand what are your known and unknown risks, and then they allow you to get into scenario-based planning. Second aspect of this kind of intersector coordination is that currently heritage is not included in emergency relief. That means the work for heritage recovery response usually starts after life saving is over and situation has been stabilized, and rest of the sectors are at post-disaster needs assessment and early recovery stage. And this results in denial of access to heritage in that early phase. Heritage sector structures are often demolished. Heritage is not considered as part of humanitarian relief, so there is no funding available. And as a result, heritage recovery and response is donor-driven and ad hoc at best. So it depends on the host government or the affected government's ability to recover its heritage and underwrite all the losses. And there are no mechanisms from international community to provide funding in a sustained way. Furthermore, partnering with humanitarian and development agencies will help us to protect livelihoods that are heavily reliant on cultural industries and intangible heritage, which are currently at risk due to globalization and obviously disaster risks. So this is something that can happen if we invest more in intersectorial coordination and build capacities for that. Finally, there's another aspect of the one that I highlighted earlier, involving communities in everyday risk management and understanding how heritage can reduce vulnerabilities. ICROM did a field project in Racha, which is a wine growing district in Georgia. It is exposed to, it's prone to earthquakes, floods, landslides. And they're working with the local communities and the local government in a game-based approach. We found out that total ban on wood cutting led to decline in woodcrafts and decline in winemaking, which in turn led to the migration of the younger population because of unemployment in the region. That led to loss of knowledge for building safe houses or seismically resistant houses. And people started using unsafe materials for construction, which in turn led to increased vulnerability to earthquakes. So this is just the way, I was speaking about systemic vulnerabilities. This is how the underlying, you can even call them underlying causes or the root causes that make us vulnerable to disaster risk. And cultural heritage is an integral part of these vulnerabilities. And it is high time that we focus on these vulnerabilities rather than just seeking technical solutions or being, just looking at hazards and just trying to instate technical aspects of it and not looking at what is happening to us and what is the root causes that are making us more vulnerable to disasters. This would also mean that we need solidarity, which is the theme of this conference, within the heritage sector for enhancing capacity for scenario-based and at-scale mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. And perhaps Gouranka would identify with this. This means that there should be more capacity to salvage, document, and store objects or even parts of buildings, because I think one of the issues was that at the time when the earthquake struck Zagreb in March, the first one, many museums had unstable buildings, and they had no storages where they could take their objects to or evacuate to safer sites. And later on in the flash floods, this was the problem, as many of the collections moved, many of the museums moved their objects to the basements, and the basements were flooded. So like a double whammy, like a domino effect was experienced. And this can be avoided if we have more capacity for this, and that means more investment in this area as well. I would like to share one concrete example of what I have been talking about. How do you build capacity for multi-hazard disaster risk management? At ICROM, we were fortunate to have the support of Swedish Postcode Foundation, and we developed a cascading capacity development project between 2019 and 2020, where we had like a long-term training where we brought in participants from 16 hazard-prone countries. These participants were drawn from the fields of disaster risk reduction, humanitarian aid, cultural heritage, and peace building. All the participants were brought together first online through mentoring, 4 months mentoring, where they were made familiar with different sectors, and they were asked to analyze their situation in their own respective countries and develop their project ideas. Then they came together for 4-week training in Rome, which was very intensive, hands-on, simulation-based. We took them to Norcia, which has been earthquake struck and is still in the phases of recovery, where the whole training was set up as a simulation, and they had chance to interact with the disaster-affected community, local community. And after that, participants were able to develop their post-training field projects, working with their different communities, as well as embedding cultural heritage in the local disaster risk management systems. They were given seed grants as well as mentoring support for 9 months. Direct result, one of the participants from Estonia, which is a small European Union country, she was able to include cultural heritage in her National Security Board's agenda. They started doing joint training for prevention of fires in museums. The participant herself is the director of the Arts and Museums Department in the National Heritage Board of Estonia. She was able to forge a multi-sectoral collaboration to build capacity in this area. Similarly, another participant who works for the National Cultural Institute for Conservation of Cultural Properties in Tokyo undertook training of humanitarians to connect recovery of documentary heritage and use it for psychosocial aid in Japan, because this is what they noticed after Sendai, the big disaster in Japan in 2011, which was a series, again, a cascading kind of a disaster. Many people took to recovering personal documentary heritage and found solace in it. So this participant has broken new ground and is trying to make humanitarians aware of how important it is to salvage and recover documentary heritage after crises. More such inspiring stories of change can be found in our recent publications that collect the lessons learned from this project, and I'm sure will be of use to many people, even local governments. We had 16 participants, 5 mentors, 16 field projects, 70 partnerships, more than several new resources, and 374 trained in different countries. And we feel that these kind of training projects where capacity is built in a cascading way and locally and are context specific are very, very important and can be easily replicated even at a local, national, regional level. We have recently developed some games for local governments to engage their local communities in understanding disaster risk and the link between disaster risk and heritage. These can be downloaded from our website. Another tool, important one, which is available for local governments, aid agencies, anybody who wants to undertake heritage recovery in conflict settings. This tool helps people to understand whether their actions or their interventions would lead to lasting peace, and if not, what steps they can take to ensure that heritage recovery leads to lasting peace. More such resources and their translations are available on our ICCROM webpage. Similar capacity development initiatives like the one that I mentioned before are also being undertaken by us. One is Alliance for Cultural Heritage, Peace and Resilience. This is a project that kick-started in 2020 and will finish in 2023. It's action in the Middle East, North Africa, and Pakistan region, where we will be looking at intersection of disasters, epidemics, and conflicts. And again, the focus would be to work with local communities and local governments and embed concerns for cultural heritage in local disaster risk management. Similarly, we are currently running an international course on rethinking disaster risk management for cultural heritage collections, which is our action in Southeast Asia, and ProCultHer, which is our action in European Union with the European Civil Protection and Italian Civil Protection, as well as other partners from France, Spain, and Turkey on protecting heritage from consequences of disasters. This project particularly focuses on ensuring that cultural heritage is included in national civil protection responses and finding a common methodology for doing so. You will be hearing about this project in the coming days in this conference, and I think this is one of the most promising steps and will be an example if we succeed to carry it through and share and disseminate the results widely. With this, I would like to conclude my presentation and will be very happy to answer questions if you have. For more information, please do write to us at FAR Program ikram.org. Thank you. Thank you so much.